We've been looking at research on attitudes toward libraries and perceptions of librarians. We've generally identified 2 points. First, people hold libraries and librarians in high regard, and second, there's a lot they don't know about library services and budgets. And now for a sobering observation. Love as a feeling doesn't necessarily translate into supportive actions and behaviors. By supportive actions, I mean things like votes at the ballot box when the library is looking for increased budgets or for funding for new facilities. Those budgets are declining in the U.S., and library levies and bond measures to raise funds there have been failing. So what's going on? Why, when libraries are well regarded and heavily used, do library projects fail to get funding and the library's cause fail to get sufficient support? Is support for libraries, which looks a mile wide when we talk about love, really just an inch deep? An OCLC study called From Awareness to Funding, a study of library support in America, makes some excellent connections between public perceptions and practical advocacy. This report groups residents by their attitudes to libraries and to library funding. These attitudes are much more significant in relation to the behaviors than the actual use by residents, as we shall see. Now, these 4 categories are super supporters, that is, the people who will always vote for the library and speak up for it. Second category, probable supporters, those who, in other words, who have positive views, but who may not necessarily act on them. Thirdly, people with barriers to support. And fourth, chronic non-voters. The report includes a separate section as well on the perception of decision makers, such as municipal politicians and senior administrators. Their findings are the most vivid wake-up call I have seen yet. I only wish that we had parallel data for every country and every community. So here are the highlights. Now, most people claim that they would support the library as voters, but actually very few people are firmly committed to doing so. Second, as we have seen in other studies, people really don't know much about the library. Third, and here is a surprise, library support is not related to library use. This is counterintuitive, isn't it? We can get great stories from users, but they are, according to this study, actually unlikely advocates. The strongest and most consistent supporters have an attitude that the library is an essential and valuable institution, even if they themselves never use it. There are 3 strong points that we can take from this report. First, librarians themselves really matter. Librarians who are seen as, quote, passionate and who are also visibly involved in the community make a documented difference. They actually engage super supporters and probable supporters for the library. Second, the library is viewed as a provider of practical answers and of information. However, the information field in which the library used to have a special, unique place is now quite a crowded space. And people these days tend to be quite confident that they can find information themselves online and find it quite conveniently. So the library has no monopoly on information. So in view of that, the library needs to be repositioned. Third, a belief that the library is transformative in people's lives is directly connected to their support. Now, I can't prove it, but all my professional experience in various kinds of libraries suggests that you could do this study and adapt it to just about any kind of library and you would get similar results. That is, that it's not about the individual transactions or the numbers. It's about the impacts that matter in people's lives, and who cares about that? 2 additional Observations from this report. First one, increasing support for libraries doesn't necessarily imply that we have to trade off financial support for other tax-supported services like fire, police, or public health. Libraries should be presented by advocates as being on par with these really essential parts of the infrastructure of our communities. And finally, elected officials are supportive, but they are not firmly committed to increasing funding. So what is the practical consequence of this study for library advocacy? Well, fundamentally, the engagement of probable supporters and super supporters to help raise library funding is essential. Not surprisingly, people in the probable supporters and super supporters categories are active, engaged, civic-minded. They are exceptionally then well-networked, and they exercise disproportionate influence to their numbers. They punch above their weight. The authors of this report say that library advocates should focus on three things in their communication. First, they say to make the library relevant for this century. That is, talk it up based on our society's current agenda. What are the things we want to achieve as a society today? Second, do instill some sense of urgency by putting the library in the same public service categories as police and parks and fire. In other words, it isn't just a nice to have. And finally, activate a conversation about the library as a vital part of the community's infrastructure and of its future. So this report actually developed several messages that form the basis for a library support brand and a related campaign to mobilize probable and super supporters. And one result of this is a social media campaign called Geek the Library, which is a new reading list. You can look at it on the internet. This awareness to funding report is a goldmine for advocates. And I hope that libraries act on the urgency that is clearly present and the rich data that we have from this report. So this wraps up perceptions of public libraries. There are, of course, additional studies of use of public libraries that I haven't mentioned. I trust that you have found this short summary of perceptions of libraries to be a helpful reminder that we need to understand how libraries are viewed from the outside before we can influence those who make decisions. It is a staple of advocacy, as it is a staple of marketing, that people do things for their own reasons and not our reasons. So we must understand their reasons and their priorities. I do urge you to read the reports and the studies that I've outlined in this session. You'll get a much more detailed picture of these perceptions and a stronger foundation for investigating the perceptions of the decision makers who are your own targets. In our next session, we're going to be looking at the processes and the techniques of influence. What works and what doesn't. Bye for now.